They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, in my case, it's going to be ice cold. Like these mountains where I now work as a rescue ranger. Like my wife's heart, who thought she could toy with an ex Marine's feelings without consequences. And like the abyss that will soon swallow two lovers who thought I was too dumb to notice their dirty little secret. I stare at my computer screen in the Mountain Rescue Dispatch Center, and the white peaks in the photos blur before my eyes. The last shift was particularly rough. 4 calls, 2 serious descents down icy slopes, 1 evacuation of an injured skier. Just another day's work for someone who used to pull his men out from under enemy fire. Except now I'm saving civilians, while my wife is being saved from boredom by the local hiking instructor. Every call in the mountains reminds me of my past, of those days when people's lives hung on your decisions, when you had to act fast and precise, with no room for error. My military training stayed with me in how I check my gear before heading out, how I calculate descent options, how I assess risks. The mountains don't forgive mistakes, just like war. Hey, John, you got a message. Mike's voice, the duty dispatcher, yanks me from my heavy thoughts. A notification pops up on the screen. Sarah has submitted a request to participate in a new route. 3-day trek, advanced difficulty. I read the lines, and something inside me tightens at the fake official tone of her email. Memory helpfully throws up images of the past, how we met right here in the mountains 3 years ago. She had just gotten her instructor certification, and I had just left the Marines. Two lonely souls finding each other among the eternal snows. She said she was captivated by my restraint, my inner strength. And I just saw in her eyes a reflection of the life I dreamed about during all my years of service. Listen, buddy. Mike fidgets by my desk, interrupting the flow of memories. There's something. I saw your Sarah at the cafe by the upper lift station yesterday. I nod. I know the place. A regular cafe for tourists and staff. We often had lunch there together when our breaks used to coincide. Used to. She wasn't alone. Mike chooses his words like a bomb disposal expert. She was with that new instructor, Jack. And it didn't look like a work meeting. They were sitting in the back corner and he was holding her hand. Something breaks inside me, but outwardly I remain calm. Military training comes to the rescue again. Don't show emotions. Analyze the situation. Plan your actions. How long have you noticed? My voice sounds hoarse, as if I've been swallowing mountain wind. Couple of weeks. Wanted to tell you earlier, but he trails off, looking at my clenched fists. John, I know you're not the type to make scenes, but listen to an old friend. Sometimes it's better to clear things up right away. And then what? I smirk. Beat up this instructor? Cause a scandal? No, Mike. In the mountains, things are handled differently. I get up from my desk and walk to the window. Outside, an endless dance of snowflakes covers the mountain slopes in a white shroud. Somewhere out there, on one of these routes, in 2 days a group of 6 people will set out. 2 reckless idiots and 4 random tourists who don't suspect their hike might be their last. Memories surface of all those times we found the bodies of unfortunate tourists. Those who fell from cliffs, froze in blizzards, plunged into crevices. The mountains know how to keep secrets, and they know how to punish those who lose their vigilance. Mike, I turn to my friend. I need information. Everything. The route, group composition, weather forecast. All dangerous sections on their path, and especially places where communication is spotty. John, he shakes his head, and I see understanding in his eyes. Just no foolishness, okay? If something happens. If something happens. I smile that special smile my Marines used to call the jarhead grin. It'll just be another mountain accident. You know how many happen each season, especially when the instructor is too distracted. I sit down at the computer and open the terrain map. There it is, their route, a winding line between peaks, 3 days of hiking, 2 passes, dozens of dangerous sections, icy slopes, narrow ledges, deep crevasses. I know these places like the back of my hand. Know where the trail becomes particularly treacherous, where rock slides happen most often, where the ice crust might not hold a person's weight. Strange choice of route, I say aloud. Too risky for this time of year. Even experienced guides usually avoid the second pass. Maybe we should warn management. Mike cautiously suggests. Why? I shrug. Jack Monroe is an experienced instructor. Surely knows what he's doing. Though they say love clouds the judgment of even the most experienced. In the evening, I return home. Our apartment greets me with the smell of coffee and soft music. Sarah is packing her backpack, humming some tune. She doesn't even flinch when I enter, so absorbed in her thoughts, or so used to lying. I watch her, leaning against the doorframe. Her movements are precise, confident, the mark of an experienced instructor. Carabiners, ropes, safety equipment. Everything goes into the backpack with the methodical precision of someone who's done this hundreds of times. Only her fingers occasionally tremble, betraying her nervousness. Getting ready for the trek, I ask, and she finally notices my presence. Yes, she continues packing, trying to avoid eye contact. New route, need to gain more experience. Of course, I walk to the window. By the way, saw the weather forecast today. They're predicting difficult conditions at the pass. Visibility near zero, gusty winds. No big deal, her voice sounds carefree, but I hear the false notes. We'll have an experienced instructor with us. Yes, I heard. I watch as dust gathers outside, turning the mountains into dark silhouettes. Jack Monroe. They say he's an excellent specialist, especially when it comes to working with female clients. She freezes for a moment, and in that pause, I hear everything I need to know. Fear, guilt, and something else, perhaps relief that she no longer needs to pretend. Didn't know you knew him, she says as casually as possible, but the backpack in her hands trembles tellingly. Oh, I know many things. I turn to face her, and now she's forced to meet my gaze. For example, that the mountains don't forgive carelessness, and that even experienced guides sometimes lose their focus, especially when their minds are occupied with things other than the route. Now she finally flinches for real, slowly straightens up, still standing with her back to me, but I see how her shoulders tense. John, it's not what you. Good night. I head for the door, feeling a cold, calculated fury growing inside. Have a good trek, and say hi to Jack. Tell him to watch the route more carefully. All sorts of things happen in the mountains. I walk out, carefully closing the door behind me. There's a clang. She drops a carabiner from her trembling hands. Or maybe that's the sound of our happiness shattering into pieces. All sorts of things really do happen in the mountains, especially when an ex-Marine decides to teach a lesson to those who betrayed him. At night, I sit long at the kitchen tables, studying maps and weather forecasts. Somewhere in the bedroom, Sarah tosses and turns restlessly, probably imagining her romantic mountain stroll. Wonder what she's thinking about. How their fingers will burn at casual touches during belaying, or how they'll share one tent while the rest of the group sleeps in another. But I'm thinking about something else, about how treacherous mountain snow can be, how easy it is to lose orientation in thick fog, how simple it is to take a wrong turn at a trail fork, and about how rescue teams can sometimes be late. After all, communication in the mountains is so unreliable. Hashtag Chapter 2. The Trap. In the morning fog, the tourist figures appear as blurred silhouettes. I observe them through binoculars from the rescue station observation point, noting every detail. 6 people, exactly as listed. 2 married couples from the city. Typical office workers who decided to get their adrenaline fix with an extreme tour. An elderly geology professor, a longtime client of our resort. And them, Jack and Sarah, standing slightly apart from the group. Group assembly at 8 o'clock, departure at 8:30. I mutter, checking the trek plan. Everything's right on schedule. Jack conducts the briefing, his hands constantly flying up in the air, pointing at something on the map. Overconfident show-off. Sarah stands nearby, supposedly helping with explanations, but I see how their fingers accidentally touch when passing equipment. Checking the weather forecast. The dispatcher's voice behind me sounds routine. John, they're predicting a sharp drop in visibility around the second pass tomorrow. Maybe we should warn the group. No need. I lower the binoculars. Jack's an experienced instructor. Surely he monitors the forecast himself. The group begins moving along the trail. I know this route by heart. The first day is indeed simple. A gentle ascent, well-marked trail, several scenic spots for rest stops. Perfect beginning to lull them into a false sense of security, to make them believe in their invulnerability. All day I patrol between observation points, monitoring their progress. They move slowly, the inexperience of most participants showing. Make frequent stops. At one rest stop, I see Jack pull out a thermos, and the whole group animatedly discusses something, passing around a cup, probably telling them his tales of conquered peaks. By evening, they set up camp exactly at the planned location, a cozy spot under a rock overhang. Even from here, I can see how Jack helps Sarah set up the tent, how they whisper about something, thinking no one notices their privacy. Idiots. In the mountains, someone's always watching you, even if you don't suspect it. At night, I return to base and immerse myself in preparation. I pull out old terrain maps, the ones kept in the Rescue Service archives. They mark all the dangerous spots, those not written about in tourist brochures, sites of old avalanches, unstable ledges, crevasses masked by snow. At dawn, while the group is just waking up in their camp, I'm already in position. The first accident should happen in 3 hours at the trail bend by the crevasse. I specially checked this section yesterday. One well-disguised cable is enough to make part of the trail crumble. Not fatal, just a first warning. They emerge from the morning fog right on schedule. Jack leads, as an instructor should. Sarah brings up the rear, helping the elderly professor. Between them, two married couples, already quite tired but still full of enthusiasm. I wait until the whole group reaches the right section. Jack crosses the dangerous spot first. Of course, he's experienced. The first married couple follows him. The second couple is right in the middle. Now, one pull of the cable and part of the trail crumbles down. Not much, just half a meter, but enough to plant the first seeds of fear. Screams, commotion, Jack rushing back to help those who fell. No one seriously injured, just bruises and fright. But the main thing is done. Their confidence has been shaken. Just an accident, Jack reassures the group, helping them cross the crumbled section. These things happen in the mountains. The important thing is to stick together. Stick together. Well, soon they'll need to hold on to each other tighter than ever, because the next accident is already waiting for them ahead. After lunch, the weather starts deteriorating, exactly as forecasted. Visibility drops, wind picks up. Perfect time for Act 2. I specifically routed them through this section, a narrow ledge above an abyss where communication is spotty. One radio is already waiting for its moment, hidden under a rock, exactly like Jack's, only with the microphone torn out. The group approaches the ledge just as the fog thickens particularly heavily. Jack tries to contact base, report passing the checkpoint. The radio hisses with interference. Strange, I hear his voice. Everything was working fine this morning. Of course it was working, until I switched it during the commotion with the landslide. Now they're cut off from the outside world. Only the emergency beacon, which should activate in case of real danger. But by the time it's needed, it'll be too late. By evening, they're behind schedule. The rockfall and communication problems took too much time. Instead of the planned campsite, they'll have to set up camp right here on the wind-swept plateau. I watch them set up tents with hands trembling from exhaustion. How Jack tries to encourage the group, but uncertainty already creeps into his voice. At night, it starts snowing. I sit in my shelter, listening to how the wind throws snow pellets against the tent. Tomorrow, they face the most challenging part of the route, where the trail winds between rock outcrops, where each step could be their last, and where their main surprise awaits. In the darkness, I check my equipment. Everything must be ready for tomorrow. Ropes, carabiners, signal flare gun. Somewhere out there, in his tent, Jack probably holds Sarah, whispers comfort in her ear. Maybe they're even making plans for the future, so distant and so ghostly here in the mountains. Let them enjoy their last peaceful evening. Tomorrow, they'll have no time for romance. Tomorrow, they'll learn what happens when you play with someone's feelings at 3,000 meters above sea level. When you betray someone who knows every rock on these slopes. When you think you can fool a man for whom the mountains have become both home and judge. The third day's dawn painted the snowy peaks blood red. I took position before daybreak, while the group was just preparing to set out. Their camp below looked like a toy. Colorful tents against endless whiteness. From here, at the high point, you can clearly see them bustling around, gathering equipment. Even through the snowfall, I recognized Jack's characteristic gestures. He's explaining something, waving his arms, probably telling them about the upcoming route, about how they'll soon cross the pass and be safe. Poor fool. He doesn't even suspect that real danger waits right up here, at the top. Base calling Alpha Group, do you copy? The radio on my belt comes alive with the dispatcher's voice. Silence. Of course, their radio accidentally broke down yesterday. Base, this is Ranger John. At observation point by the pass. I can see the group. They're starting the ascent. My voice sounds military crisp. Copy that. Keep an eye on them. Forecast shows avalanche danger. Avalanche danger? Oh, yes. Especially when you know exactly where to plant the charges. 3 years working in the mountains taught me a lot. For example, that a small directed explosion in the right place can trigger a snowslide, and a signal flare if fired at a certain point on the slope. The group starts climbing the steep slope. They move slowly, cautiously. Yesterday's accidents clearly shook their confidence. Jack leads, breaking trail. Sarah brings up the rear. Now she keeps her distance from him, as if she sensed something. Between them, 4 tourists rope together, like prisoners chained in one line. I take out my binoculars. There they are, conquering the first steep section. There they stop for a break. Even from here, I can see how heavily the elderly professor is breathing. There they start moving again, and then Jack does exactly what I counted on. He chooses a shorter path, cutting across the trail's switchback. Idiot, I whisper, watching them move onto the open slope. You yourself taught others not to go here after snowfall. But love makes people blind, especially when they're rushing to finish the route and be alone together. I see Sarah trying to tell him something, probably warning about the danger, but he just waves her off. Overconfident fool. They reach the most dangerous section just as the sun rises high enough to start melting the snow. Perfect timing. Perfect location. I take out the signal flare gun, the same kind every instructor carries. Standard equipment for distress signals, or for triggering an avalanche. I fire the first shot just above the group. The red flare hisses as it buries itself in the snow cornice. The sound of the shot echoes off the cliffs, creating the illusion of a rockfall. I see the tourists flinch how Jack looks around, trying to identify where the threat is coming from. The second shot lands to the right. Now they're truly scared. Jack shouts something, trying to speed up the group's movement. Too late, friend, far too late. The third shot becomes the last. The fiery point pierces exactly into the overhanging cornice, and for a second, absolute silence reigns. And then the slope comes alive. It starts as a quiet rustle, like someone flipping pages in a giant book. Then the sound grows, turning into a rumble. The snow slab begins to move, slowly, almost majestically. I see Jack's eyes widen in horror as he realizes what's happening. How Sarah screams, pointing upward. How the tourists panic. The avalanche engulfs them in seconds. A white wall crashes down on the group, sweeping everything in its path. They don't even have time to unclip the safety rope. That very rope that was supposed to protect them now drags them down into the snowy hell. I wait another 5 minutes until the snow dust settles. Then I switch on the radio. Base, this is Ranger John, observing avalanche in Sector D7. Tourist group caught in the slide. Need urgent assistance. Copy that. Sending rescue team. Can you determine? Base, this is Ranger John, observing avalanche in Sector D7. Tourist group caught in the slide. Need urgent assistance. Copy that. Sending rescue team. Can you determine the location of the victims? Looks like they've been swept into the small ravine. starting descent for reconnaissance. I deliberately take my time with the descent. Let them freeze a bit, think about life. By the time I reach the site, they've already dug themselves out of the snow. Miraculously, no one died, just bruises and mild frostbite. The avalanche just played with them, like a cat with a mouse, before dropping them into the ravine. Ranger John. I ski down the slope, acting like a winded rescuer. Everyone alive. Jack stands on his knees, head in his hands. His overconfidence washed away with the snow. Sarah shivers from cold and fear, trying to help the tourists. And I survey the area, calculating my next move. The snowmobile can only take 4 people, I say, looking at the shivering tourists. We'll have to make 2 trips. But Jack raises his eyes to me, and I see understanding in them. He's figuring it out, finally figuring it out. We'll evacuate the civilians first. My voice brooks no argument. You and your assistant will wait for the second trip. I'm sure you have plenty to talk about. I help the tourists onto the snowmobile. They don't even notice the look Jack and I exchange. But Sarah notices, and something in her face tells me she's figured it out too. I'll be back in a couple hours, I say, starting the snowmobile. Stay together. All sorts of things happen in the mountains. As the snowmobile moves away, carrying the frightened tourists to safety, I take one last look at the remaining couple. They stand close together, but there's now a chasm between them as wide as this ravine. Wonder what they'll think about during these 2 hours. About how wonderful the mountains look in the setting sun, or about what happens when you betray someone who knows all the secrets of these mountains. Hashtag Chapter 4. Vengeance. Night in the mountains is special. When the sun disappears behind the peaks, the world shrinks to the tiny spot of light from an emergency lamp. Everything else is bottomless darkness where all your fears hide. I observe 2 figures in the ravine through night vision goggles. They sit by a weak fire, trying to stay warm. 4 hours have passed since I took the tourists away. 4 hours alone with fear and cold. Sarah and Jack barely talk. There's a wall between them now, not of snow and ice, but of realizing their own stupidity. I see how she periodically flinches at every sound coming from the slopes. How he nervously checks the time on his watch, understanding that the rescuer should have returned much earlier. Bay's calling Ranger John. The radio comes alive with the dispatcher's voice. Report situation. At observation point, I reply. Tourists delivered to safety, returning for the remaining ones as soon as weather permits. In reality, the weather is perfect. Starry sky, light frost. Ideal conditions for a rescue rangers might work, or for the final act of revenge. I descend closer, hiding behind rock outcrops. Now their voices are audible, subdued, tense. They're finally starting to talk. This wasn't an accident, was it? Sarah's voice trembles. The avalanche, the radio, all of it. He knew. He knew all along. Come on. Jack tries to act brave, but I hear fear in his voice. Just a coincidence. He's a professional. He has to rescue us. Professional? She laughs bitterly. You don't know him like I do. He was a Marine, Jack. 3 years in combat zones. You think it's hard for him to arrange an accident? A heavy pause follows. Somewhere in the distance, a rock breaks loose from the slope, its echo bouncing off the ravine walls like sinister laughter. What have I done? Whispers Sarah, and in her voice I hear genuine remorse for the first time. For what? For a couple weeks of adrenaline? For an illusion of freedom? Hey, we love each other. Jack tries to embrace her, but she pulls away. Love. Her laugh sounds like sobbing. We don't even know each other, Jack. I traded a man who would die for his principles for. For what? For a pretty fairy tale about romance in the mountains. I see her stand up, walk to the edge of the platform. Her silhouette stands out sharply against the starlit sky. You know what's the scariest thing? She continues. Not the cold, not the danger, but understanding that I betrayed not just my husband. I betrayed myself, what I believed in, what I took pride in. Sarah, stop. Jack rises too. He's just running late. He'll be back soon, and everything will be. Nothing will be, she cuts him off. You really don't understand. He's not late. He's waiting. watching, like they taught him in the Marines. Study your enemy, wear them down, and then. At this moment, I switch on the powerful flashlight, directing the beam straight at them. They freeze, blinded by the sunlight. And then, give them a chance to realize their mistakes. My voice echoes through the ravine. I descend to them, slowly, keeping the light in their eyes. Sarah doesn't move, either from fear or from understanding the inevitable. Jack takes a step back, and his heel hangs over the edge of the cliff. Ranger John, I switch on the radio. Arrived at evacuation point, starting to bring up the victims. Copy that. Base responds. Need assistance? Negative. I'll manage. I take out the rope and safety equipment. Everything by the book according to protocol. Throw the rope end to Sarah. Ladies first. Safety through the harness. Check the carabiner's strength. She silently takes the rope, her fingers trembling, but movements precise, still an experienced instructor after all. I start pulling her up, meter by meter. When she's halfway up, I turn to Jack. Get ready, you're next. He nervously nods, checking his equipment. Sarah's almost at the top when I take out the signal flare gun, the same one that triggered the avalanche. You know what's funny? I say, looking him in the eyes. In the mountains, there's often an echo, especially from loud sounds. The shot thunders like a clap of doom. The red flare whistles into the night sky, its reflections dancing on the ravine walls. And then comes the echo, multiplied by the cliffs. And with it, that very sound that all mountain guides fear, the sound of awakening snow. No, Jack manages to cry out as the wall of snow breaks loose from the slope. I manage to jerk the rope, pulling Sarah up a moment before the avalanche engulfs the bottom of the ravine. Thunder, grinding rocks, and then silence. Endless, ringing silence of the mountain night. What? What have you done? Whispers Sarah, looking down where the snowflow has swallowed everything, including the last traces of her romance. Me? I start coiling the rope. Just signaled base about completing the rescue operation. Unfortunately, not everyone could be saved. Such things happen in the mountains, especially to those who forget about caution. I switch on the radio. Base, Ranger John reporting. Second avalanche occurred, 1 casualty. Search impossible until morning. Copy that. The dispatcher's voice sounds tired. Return to base. We walk to the snowmobile. Sarah is silent, and in this silence is understanding of what happened, of what had to happen, and of what comes to those who play with a man for whom the mountains became not just work, but an instrument of justice. They say time heals. They lie. 3 months have passed since that night in the mountains, and Sarah still wakes up screaming. I hear it through the wall. We sleep in separate rooms now. Hear how she walks around the apartment in the pre-dawn hours when she thinks I'm asleep. How she stops at the window, peering at the mountain peaks, barely visible in the darkness. Wonder what she sees there. The avalanche swallowing her lover, or her own reflection. A pale shadow of the confident woman she used to be. She never went back to work. Who would hire an instructor whose hands shake at the sight of snow? Who sees a reminder of what she witnessed in every mountain slope? Post-traumatic stress disorder, the therapist said, as if that explains anything. They found Jack's body only after a week when it started to thaw. Or rather, what was left of him. Official conclusion, accident. Nobody dug deeper. Such things happen often in the mountains, especially with overconfident guides who don't follow safety protocols. They close the case quickly, but something in my colleagues' looks changed. They don't say anything out loud, but I feel it. They know, or suspect. You did it on purpose, Sarah said one evening when we ran into each other in the kitchen. Not a question, a statement. Her voice sounded hollow, lifeless. Planned every detail. I silently poured tea into cups. Her hands shook so badly I had to help her hold the cup. Why? She wasn't looking at me. Why didn't you just divorce me? What would that have changed? I sat across from her. You'd have run off into the sunset with him. Lived happily ever after. No, dear. Some lessons need to be taught differently. To be remembered. She shuddered, spilling tea. hot drops on pale skin, but she didn't even notice the pain. You're a monster, she whispered. No, I shook my head. I'm just a man who knows the price of betrayal and knows how to punish for it. Since that night, she barely talks, mechanically performs household chores, cooks food she hardly eats. Sometimes I hear her talking to herself in an empty room. Or Jack. Who knows what goes on in the mind of someone who witnessed such things? Her parents tried to intervene. Came, tried to convince her to move in with them. She refused. Not out of love for me, out of fear. I saw it in her eyes when she hurriedly shook her head, rejecting their offer. She's afraid I'll find her. That one night that shot will ring out again, followed by white death. Funny, but our marriage is stronger now than ever. Not because of love or loyalty, because of fear and understanding. She knows what I'm capable of doing to those who betray me. And I just observe how slowly the psyche crumbles of someone who's lost their footing. Today, I came back from duty earlier than usual. The house is unusually quiet. I walk into the kitchen and freeze in the doorway. Sarah sits at the table, photos spread out before her. Our old pictures in the mountains when we were happy, or thought we were happy. I tried to remember, she says, not raising her head. When did it all go wrong? When did I decide I could play with a man capable of such things? And what did you remember? I lean against the doorframe. Nothing. She gathers the photos with trembling hands. It's all like in a fog. Like then, in the ravine. You know, I hear that sound every night. The rumble of falling snow. Jack's scream. Your calm voice on the radio. She falls silent, gripping the photos so hard her knuckles turn white. You'll never let me go, will you? In her voice, not a question, understanding. Why? I come closer, put my hands on her shoulders. She flinches but doesn't pull away. Where would you go? Who would understand you better than the man who made you this way? She starts crying, silently, hopelessly, and I stand over her, looking out the window where the mountain peaks rise. They keep our secret, one of many in their eternal history. Keep the memory of that night when justice was served, when the lesson was taught. And Sarah, well, she learned that lesson too well. So well that now she can't live with this knowledge, can't run from it, can only exist beside the man who showed her the true price of betrayal. Every morning I go to work to save people in the mountains. Every evening I return home to a woman I once loved and now just keep in the cage of my revenge. And somewhere out there, under the thickness of snow, lies a man whose death became her eternal reminder. Some mistakes can't be fixed. Some wounds don't heal. Some revenge is worse than death.